Hi, everyone. My name is Mohit Sarveiya. Thank you, Brendan, and Shalom. My presentation is on Jetpack Compose versus SwiftUI. I'm a GD in Kotlin and Android, and I'll share with you how these two frameworks match up against each other. So, what I'll share with you is in these frameworks, how do you handle concurrency? How do you handle managing state and navigation? So, what is the benefit of, like, you might be an Android engineer and you might just be concerned with Compose, and what's the benefit of looking into SwiftUI? The benefit is that it allows you to collaborate with the iOS dev that you're working with, allows you to allows you to learn about how they're approaching, architecting a specific feature that you're also building in Compose. So that's the benefit of looking into this other framework on iOS. And so for this presentation, I wanted to keep it practical. I want to share with you how to build a really simple, practical app in both of those platforms and compare to the approaches that you would take to manage state. So suppose I wanted to build this app here, a simple app, and this is an app that displays basically a grid, a list of images in a grid or a list, and allows you to also search for an image. And it also has this feature of being able to search and display images, and also to display the details of a particular image, like its location and tags. So it has a list screen and a detail screen, and the detail screen has this additional feature of being able to favorite it, to like it. So when you look at both of these, when you look at this example, how would I build this in Compose and SwiftUI? So when you look at this list that I have here, in Compose, like these are the constructs that these frameworks provide in order for you to specify state, in order for you to manage state. And I'll go over each of these different things for this application. So let's look at first Compose and how we go about setting up our state and our views for this simple example. So suppose I want to be able to make a request and set up the states to display these list of images. So you could set up, one common in the examples, you'll see a common way to set up your architecture is to have, like, use an MVVM architecture where you have a screen, which is some composable function that interacts with the view model. And the view model has some type of UI state that it's exposing to this composable method. And then the composing method is recomposing. Basically, you're declaring what's going to be visible based on the UI state. So how would you set up your view model? You could set it up using immutable state flow that has some UI state. And the UI state could be, you want to display a loading state, successful state, that you have these list of images, go ahead and display them. Or you have an error state or some error message that occurred. So your state flow by default has this loading state, and you're in your view model, you're pushing things to it. So in your view model, when it first loads up, when it gets instantiated, you may make a request, basically, hey, I want to launch a coroutine, and tell my repository to, using coroutines, basically get these images from somewhere. So when that request is successful, then you'll give it to this UI state. Basically, here are these images, display them in the UI. So, and I'm pushing them to my immutable state flow. So in my composable function, like, how do I basically read from this stream of data in the stream of UI states? So in my images list screen, I could set it up as a composable, method. I have a composable method here. And in there, basically what I want to do is be able to read from the state. So the Compose Jetpack Compose framework provides you with bridges of being able to handle streams, different types of streams of data, if you're using live data or flow observable. And for this example, I could use collect as state. And basically, I'm going to use collect that state and pull whatever UI state that I have. And I could use a one statement there with the UI state and specify in a declarative way what I want to show on the screen for loading, success, and error. So for loading, you would display a circular progress indicator. And in order to, you could specify modifiers like this and center it on the screen. That's what I'm doing here, wrapping it in a column and centering it. So that's my loading state, and this is how it would look. Very, very simple. What about when you're in the state of success and you have a list of images? So in order to do that, in order to display a list of images, when you look at this UI, you have two different views here. You have a search view and on the bottom a grid. And I want to display them in vertically stacked together. So in Compose, I could use a column for that. So the way that it would look when you have a success state is that you use a column. There's also a row. In the column, I have a composable method that I made called search view. Compose doesn't have a built-in search, so you could build it yourself. And there's also a lazy vertical grid that I'm using. So the lazy vertical grid, I could specify how many columns are there going to be in the grid, and I hard coded it 3. So in there, you could then go through all the images from your UI state and then render it on the screen. So the image that what I'm using here is that it's Coil. Coil is a library that has coroutine integration, and that basically it has also integration with Jetpack Compose, and that's what I'm using here with Remember Image Painter. So, and I can specify the size I want with these images and some modifiers I want. So that's what I did here, specify the size and the content scale. So after building that, what you have is really quickly a simple list of images that you have displayed in the UI. And basically, so far, what I did was that I read, a stream of data, converted into something Compose could understand using collect that state and then show it on the screen. So now, how do you handle the ability to search for this and filter this list down and search for images? How do you handle that type of state changes? So in order to be able to handle that, what I want to do is set up so that when the user search for something, enters a query, it sends an event to the view model, and the view model takes it and searches it, filters this list, but it communicates back, to the image list composable that here's the new list of images that you want to display. So and it updates, it updates a new state, it produces a new state that the image list view will render. In order to set that up, how would I set up searching the search view? So in the search view, what I want to be able to do is that I want to be able to remember what the user is searching, the query that the user is typing. And when they're done, I want to be able to perform some search and propagate that event externally. So what I could do is set up a search view like this, a composable method like this, which has Jetpack Compose provides a outline text field, which is a text field that has a border around it, and this method has different parameters that I could set up to listen into what the user is typing, etc. So what I want to do, is to utilize these methods these arguments called value, which shows, which shows something in this text field, and then this on value change gets called every time the person is typing. It's kind of like text watcher in a text field. So What I want to do is be able to remember the query, the state of the query, which is what I'm doing here. I'm setting up a state using mutable state of, which has an empty string. So the search view starts with an empty query. And this thing will get updated every time the user is typing to remember basically the query at the end when the user is done and ready to search for something. So basically, in this outline text field, I give it the query state, the value of it I'm going to display in the text field. And I basically specify every time the user is typing something to always keep updating the state, keep updating it. And I'm going to utilize this state to be able to tell my view model, here's the query. So the way you do that is that I need to be able to hook into when the person like Mars, clicks on done in the keyboard, and there's a parameter in this outline text field method that has this, which is I want to send the state to my view model. So what I'm going to do is specify using a callback like on search. So this is in the examples, you'll see this common approach. This is one approach you could take, but you could take another approach where you directly pass into the search view the view model and call the method on the view model rather than having mixing, a callback and a reactive two approaches together. So those are the two approaches you could take, have it like this or pass in the view model directly. So basically in my text field, when I'm going to intercept when the user has, completed searching for something in the on done basically callback, I'm going to say on search, and and grab the query from my query state. And this will propagate basically the search event externally out from from this search view composable. And basically, so, and then externally where I have in the images list view composable, where I have specified the search view, I could do image views model.search images. This is one approach you could take, but you could also like just give this image view model to the search view also. So that's how you could handle searching. You can make it more robust to cancel a pending request if you want. So, and in my view model, I would basically, start off with my loading state, start off with, and then make a request for this query, and then give the result back, and then the image list, method will recompose. So it's a very simple way to do it, and if I implement that, you'll see that here I'm searching NYC, and I click on the done button, and it loads basically. So you could also like configure this to search while you're typing, but I have configured it when you click on the done button in the keyboard. So this is how you would handle that state for searching. So what about if you want to display basically a list of, and what about, that's those are all of that's everything in this page. Now let's look at how you would handle going to the details page, handling state for that. And in order to do that, I need to be able to load this information, tags and location, and I need to be able to show the state of the heart icon, as you can see there. So what I will show you with this is how Compose has something called side effects. So I'm going to create a composable method for image detail screen that takes in an image ID. And you're going to take that image ID and load all the details for it. So the way you would do that, you could do that is with using side effects, and have a side effect that tells the view model, I want to get more information. So I'm going to specify in this composable method a side effect called launch effect. There are different types of side effects that exist, and it just takes in a unique identifier which I specified as the image ID. So in this side effects, basically the launch, when that screen launches, will tell my view model to get information, get the image details basically. And it will go ahead and get the image details. And in this image detail screen, what I'm going to do is that I'm also going to take the same approach of listening to the UI state, and based on the different cases, I'll specify what UI should be shown for these different UI states. So for a success state, I'm going to show basically in a column, and the image and the text view underneath it for location, etc. Where things get interesting is how do you handle the ability to like an image, because that also makes an asynchronous request, and I want to be able to make the user experience really well, not to have a loading progress bar for it. So for this, for being able to specify, the like icon, I need to create a toolbar for this, and Compose provides you with the ability to scaffold your UI, and it has a scaffold method that you can specify, which you could specify a top bar and the things that it has and the actions that it will have and the content underneath it. So in this case is we have some title in the top bar, and also we could specify what actions that toolbar has, which is basically this icon. I want to display this icon, this favorite icon, basically. So how do I manage, when you like it, I want this, when you click on it, I want the state of it to change. And how do I handle that? So the way you could handle that is in your view model, you could specify a state for like using mutable state of, and you could specify default value is false. And my view, my composable method will read this to update the state of the icon. So in my view model, when you go and click on this method, you could basically will call this method in my view model where I eagerly update the value of that state to be true. And the reason why I do that is I don't want to display a progress bar. I want the state to update really quickly. And then I'm going to launch a coroutine inside of which I basically make a request to like an image. And if it's a failure, then I update it back. So here I'm eagerly updating basically my state and then updating it in the false in the failure scenario. So you could also, someone could click on that button twice. So you could also set this up where you have basically you could cancel a running coroutine if you want. So here, basically in my composable method, I'm going to specify using this remember method that this is the state I want you to remember for my view model, and I'm going to utilize it to update the icon. So every time I click on that icon, the state will update quickly, and it will basically render it will recompose basically. So and then I could specify a click listener to go to my view model and communicate to it that I want to like an image and make a request for that. So that's how you would handle, one way to handle, that state change of favoriting a particular image. So lastly, how do you, set up navigation with Compose? Is that I want to click on one of these things and it opens up the detail screen. So there's a nav host that you can specify. This also works with fragments, but you can set up a nav host in which you specify which composable methods that you can navigate to. So I want to go from list to details. I could grab a nav controller at the root level of my app, and I could say nav controller. I want to specify my composables like this, image list, image details that I want. And for the details screen, well, the interesting part is that, one of the recommended approaches is to use a route-based navigation approach. So when you navigate to details, you go, you say navigate image details, give the ID. So that's one recommended approach from their documentation that you could take. And basically, you could give to the detail screen the arguments. You could, from from when you navigate to it, you could pull out the arguments like this and give the image ID. So uh, that's one way. That's one way to set up navigation with Compose. So what we did was build a simple, application with Compose using these three different things: side effects, being able to specify state. So how do you solve the same problem using SwiftUI? Solving the same problem using SwiftUI is very different. It's a different way of thinking. It's not really the same thing. And so that's one thing to know. And let's look at what I mean by that. So suppose I want to build the same thing using SwiftUI. How do I do that? So in SwiftUI, this is the app that I want to build, as I showed earlier. And the way you would set that up is you have a view that's going to listen to some observed object. And this object has, and whenever it changes, there's some property that changes, the view will re-render. So for my images repository, for example, I'm going to set that up as an observable object that the view is, observing. And inside of it, the image list of images, I'm specifying it as published, at published. So whenever you publish changes to it, the view will re-render. So basically, how do you make a request, API request with Swift to be able to handle this? So Swift 5.5 has, similar to coroutines like async await, and has this concept of task. And it's very similar to coroutines. So how do you set that up? So I could specify in this repository a get images async method that makes some asynchronous, requests, and I get the data back, and I update this published object. So updating this published object, one of the problems you'll get is this, that you could only update this published object from the main thread, not from a background thread. So one thing, common pattern, is to specify the repository or the method using this main actor. So Swift 5.5 introduces this concurrent synchronization pattern with actors. So there's a you want to specify this annotation. That means that these updates to the images published object ensures that will be done in the main thread. So then what I want to be able to do is bridge this to my view, be able to hook it up, have my view hook it up to that published object. How do I do that? So in Swift, all the views are structs, and they adhere to this protocol called view, and inside of which I have a property called body, inside of which I could specify what I want to display. So this view, in order to bridge it to that repository, I'm using the state object method. This is how I'm building this bridge to it. One good pattern to best practice to follow is to use at state object whenever you're instantiating some class. There's also at state. Do not use at state in this case. Use at state object. So how do I make a request when this content view loads and tell this repository, here, give me the data? The great thing is about in SwiftUI is that it has this .task method in which you can launch task. The great thing is that this method, when you launch task in this way, it handles canceling it for you. So I'm going to say await repository get images, and gets me the data. And while the data is loading, I want to show a progress bar. And I want to be based on so I'm going to specify using at state. So at state is the most commonly thing you would use in the SwiftUI app. And I'm doing show progress bar of true. When I get data back, I'll set this to false. So in my details view, I have to display an in progress bar in the grid. So you want to display one things on top of the other, you could use a Z stack. So a Z stack, in there I have if show progress bar, that state is true, display or progress view, basically. Whenever the images have finished loading, make the show progress bar to false. So update that state to render the progress bar and then the successful state. So that's how you handle that state, communicating with the repository. And this is what it will display there. So what if now I want to be able to display a particular image? I want to display these grid of images. How do I handle that? So in SwiftUI, you have lazy regrid, which you could specify a spacing of in the columns of about 10, and in there you could for each basically go through the repo, same as compose, and then you could specify basically an image. The difference here is that in the way when I was switching back and forth, when you switch back and forth with Compose Swift UI, you'll get into this confusion not really confusion, muscle memory. And here, this world of muscle memory is to when you want to specify modifiers, you do dot recycle, dot frame, dot padding. Whereas in Compose, you may your muscle memory is to specify like the modifier equal modifier dot, some padding, etc. So there's a difference in terms of that. And how do we? So that's a very simple example setting up a lazy vgrid. How do I handle searching? Searching is very easy to handle in Swift UI. And I found basically you have some state like this, which is the query, similar to what we had in Compose, but Swift UI has a built-in component with this. So you just do whatever you want to set it up, the view that you want to set it up into above, you just do dot searchable and will pop to create that search UI for you. And you give it basically the search text state. So this is an example of two-way binding. Very important. One of the important things to know in SwiftUI, two-way binding, which is so I'm doing $sign and then that state object. So what I'm doing is that what's going to happen is that anything you type from that other view, it's going to have a two-way binding updating this state right here, this state right here. So that's a two-way binding, and that's commonly used in SwiftUI. So how do I want to populate my search results. So I just do like this, read that state, and depending on whether if it's empty, go to the repository, otherwise filter basically the images. So that's how you would handle two-way binding with Swift UI. So it's the same problem. We're doing it differently in Compose versus Swift UI. It's not the same way to do it. How would you handle liking an image? This is also something important to know that it shows the difference between those two frameworks and how you'd approach the same problem. So in Swift, when the details view in Swift UI, I don't have to pass in an ID. I could very easily pass in, an image data class. I don't have to mark it parsable or anything. There's no reason for that. Why? And in my details view, in order to set up the like state, I have at state object is like to be false. And then I have when the view appears, I want to set up this basically the state. So there is a hook into when this view appears on appear method. And I just pull the data from my image data that was passed in when I clicked on the cell. And then I am updating my state object like this. So then basically then that will set the state as you enter the page. What about when you click on it? So when you click on it, you could set up a toggle. So this is the click listener for that button. Great thing I found in Swift that was really nice is that it has a dot toggle method, which is nice. So which basically toggles the state of that true or false. That's what Booleans can't have, and that method it has that method for Booleans in Swift. So I'm going to toggle that state. But when the state is toggled, I want to be able to do something, basically make a request when you set it to true or false. So I could listen to the changes of that state using onChange method like this. OnChange of is liked as the state object. And basically what I want to do is be able to make a request, basically. So in Swift 5.5, there is this task API that was introduced, and you could launch tasks similar to launching, it will launch tasks in the background similar to launching coroutines. So I'm basically, when this state is true, launch a task. There's existing task, cancel it. Otherwise, launch a task inside of which you like an image. One thing to note here is that when I had to handle cancellation myself here in this task, and because I'm not handling this task in the dot task method that they provide on the view, and so that's what I'm doing there. Another thing to note is that I specified this task with the at state object, so at state annotation. So this is how you would handle basically liking, the ability to like something, the favorite that icon. How you would handle that same problem. I approached it very differently than I did with Compose. There are some differences, similarities there. So, how would you handle navigation? So, navigation, the way you handle is that this list view, which is displayed, the main view has a navigation. There's a navigation view that's provided to you, and you could set up a navigation link to specifying the destination. So you specify a navigation view, and here's the link that I want to go to. One thing to note here, this is not route based. It's not like images slash image ID. I'm passing in the object, which is the image data. And that was easier that I found working with SwiftUI. So basically, the one thing to note is that, how do you specify like a toolbar like this? So basically, every view, what the great thing is that in the details view or in the list view, every like the view has that dot, a method like dot, you could do dot toolbar. So you could specify like the toolbar logic, the logic for this toolbar item, like have it encapsulated for the view that you need it for. In Compose, there are two approaches you can take, which is basically have a root nav host, and have one scaffolding in which the content changes. Or you could take the other approach of having basically two different scaffoldings, and there's a flashing. I found there's a problem where you got into where in which the screen flashes. So, and there are workarounds for that you'll find on Stack Overflow. So those are the two different worlds, and I use these are the construct that the framework provides to be able to specify a state, and I showed you how to do that with this example. So I basically open source these two different apps I made, and to illustrate the different ways to solve the same problem. It's on GitHub, so you could check it out. And thank you for. I hope that was helpful to understand different ways you could approach the same problem in both of those frameworks. And thank you for Android Worldwide for having me, given for the opportunity to present here. And thank you.
Thank you, Mohit. We do have a question. William Scheller asks, two-way binding is core in SwiftUI. Do you know if Compose has two-way binding?
I don't know, actually. I'm still, I don't know that. So.
Fair enough. I did see another question, I think, that got deleted that is Jetpack Compose Kotlin multi-platform. I'm guessing I doubt it, but I do know that JetBrains has a Compose library as well.
Yeah, you could build desktop UIs with their Compose library that they have. With second question is, which did you find easier? Yeah, that's I found I don't well that question is certain things were not easy. So setting up navigation on Compose for me, I mean, for it was not easy than it was on SwiftUI. On SwiftUI, when you're setting up that Z stack where you have a vertical, you don't want to display things vertically, right? Search view, image list. The funny thing is, it's not that easy as in Compose because you have to set up these spacers. And one thing I found easy in SwiftUI, like in Xcode, I'm building something, I'm building this, and I could like in the IDE, you have this in there, you could like, it's a simulator, not really an emulator, but you could easily like navigate inside of your Xcode, whereas in Compose land, you have to actually run it on an emulator to be able to, like in the preview, you can navigate inside basically to a particular details view, I found. So those are the differences. So it depends on where you're trying to, well, on different things. The navigation, the toolbar was easy. It was not easy in the Compose, basically, world. So that was it. How would you compare Compose? I have no idea. I don't know the answer to that. You probably know it better than me.
I don't know is a very valid answer. Do we have any other questions for Mohit? I will take that as a sign that we can return 3 minutes to you to increase your 15-minute break before the next session. Mohit, thank you so much for presenting. That was super useful for those of us who want to know a little bit about both platforms, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.